Ballistic missiles rained down on Israel. An unprecedented response by Iran after weeks of Israeli escalation, pushing the region to a dangerous new precipice. This is the story of how the past few weeks brought the Middle East to a dangerous new moment.
The status quo cannot continue. This requires a change in the balance of power on our northern border.
Hezbollah launched the first attack against Israeli positions last year on October the 8th in support of Gaza. Israel retaliated. A year on from those exchanges of fire, the conflict has reached a new level. The 17th of September saw a new escalation begin. Pagers and walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah operatives exploded. Simultaneous attacks in supermarkets, on the streets, in cars and in homes across Lebanon.
The enemy has crossed all red lines.
Israel says it's intent on eliminating the threat of Hezbollah. Over 1,000 have been killed and many more injured, and almost 1 million displaced since Israel launched a huge wave of devastating airstrikes on Lebanon.
My siblings and their children were all killed here.
And then,
in the last hour, Israel has claimed to have killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, in an overnight strike.
how did rapid escalation change the face of Lebanon and set the region on a dangerous new course?
I am Carine Torbey, the Beirut correspondent for BBC Arabic. I grew up in Lebanon. This country is no stranger to crisis, nor is it surprised by wars and tension with its neighbor, Israel. Over the last year, Israel and Hezbollah have been engaged in a relatively low-level conflict following the Hamas attack on Israel. They exchanged fire across the border. But the speed and scale of what is happening now has been shocking and unprecedented. It has sent waves of disbelief and panic throughout the region. We captured this through extensive underground reporting. In this special program, we'll look back at how we got here and what it means.
It was an attack like something from a tale of espionage. It's the middle of September and people are going about their everyday lives when pagers belonging to Hezbollah members explode across Lebanon in a coordinated and deadly attack. Hezbollah is prescribed as a terrorist organization by many Western governments. However, within Lebanon, Hezbollah has a significant role in the country's parliament and government. The organization had abandoned mobile phones for fear of being tracked. This attack showed those precautions had not been successful. The pagers were turned into weapons. Hezbollah members were hit by blasts in supermarkets, on the streets, in their cars, and at home, next to their children. People are killed and thousands injured, women and children among them. Most injuries affected the face, eyes, fingers, and stomach.
Incarcerated inside the eye.
I met Dr. Ilyas Warraq, an eye surgeon at the Mount Lebanon Hospital.
It has been a nightmare. Probably this is the worst day of my life as a physician. Unfortunately, we were not able to save a lot of eyes. I can tell you that probably more than 60 to 70% of the patients ended up with eviscerating or removing at least one of their eyes. And we're talking about young population, about patients in their 20s.
I was outside the hospital. Relatives waited for news of their loved ones. the shock and fear palpable.
Of course, Lebanon is still in state of shock and disbelief about what happened, but there are also very pressing questions today on everyone's mind. First of all, what did actually happen? How did it happen? And second of all is basically, how is this going to affect the ongoing confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel that has been, on daily basis witnessing cross-border hostilities between the two parties for 11 months now. But what happened at this point is a major escalation of unprecedented level.
And it didn't stop there. The next day, as Hezbollah buried their dead, fresh attacks. We were there. In the panic and confusion, people asked us to put our cameras down.
This is a scene next to the funeral where the funeral was being held. And as you can see, people are gathering. We asked what's happening. They told us another pager blew up on a young man.
This time it wasn't pagers. It was the walkie-talkies of Hezbollah operatives.
Although Israel has not claimed responsibility for either attack, there is widespread belief in Lebanon that it is Israel that carried out both of them. Now, as Hezbollah and the country are still reeling from the shock, the main question is, what's next?
Whether this was a coordinated plan by Israel or not, these attacks were the trigger of what came next.
If you're just joining us, we are expecting to hear from the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah.
2 days after the pager attack, Hassan Nasrallah, longtime leader of Hezbollah and closely aligned with Israel's arch foe, Iran, announced that the attack would not go unpunished.
The enemy has crossed all red lines.
Israeli airstrikes stretched further into Lebanon in an attempt to further diminish Hezbollah.
There seems to be no possibility of diplomacy getting through and de-escalating the situation.
The center of gravity is moving towards the north. This means we are diverting forces, resources, and energy towards the north.
So how did it reach this point? Hezbollah has been launching rockets and missiles at Israeli military positions since October the 8th last year, and Israel has been retaliating. Hezbollah called it the Gaza Support Front in solidarity with Palestinians there. After Israel launched a war in Gaza following the October 7th attacks last year by Hamas on Israel, Hezbollah's goal was to divert Israeli military resources away from Gaza towards the northern front with Lebanon.
We say to the enemy's government, army, and society that the Lebanon front will not stop until the aggression on Gaza ends.
This exchange of fire has had a huge impact on civilians, with about 150,000 displaced on both sides. Israelis from villages like these want to return to their homes without the threat of attack.
Going back to something that we used to live that way is no longer an option. It's no longer an option that we are be under the threat of some guy in Beirut that would like to pull the trigger anytime he likes.
Pressure was building on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to return civilians to their homes after tens of thousands fled due to Hezbollah's attacks. For Netanyahu, this was a key motivation for stepping up strikes. Earlier in the year, we traveled with the UN to southern Lebanon to see the damage to towns and villages there. What we found was empty villages, abandoned homes, peaceful life erased. It already felt like no man's land.
This was a coffee shop, and next to it here was a two-story building standing. Now it's reduced to this one massive hole in the ground.
What's happened here in this area over the last year has ended one of the longest periods of relative calm between Israel and Lebanon.
The two countries have a long history of hostilities and wars. Israel occupied southern Lebanon for decades, and Hezbollah and Israel fought a month-long war in 2006. But this escalation felt different. There were real concerns with tensions in the Middle East so high. This conflict, unlike those before, could spill over and result in a bigger, more dangerous regional war. Israel's increased attacks on the Iranian-backed Hezbollah meant the two long-running enemies, Israel and Iran, were watching each other's moves closely. For Lebanon and its people caught in the crossfire, what is happening in their country runs deep in their collective memory.
A week after the Beirut attack, a further escalation rocked Lebanon.
As morning broke, it brought with it one of the deadliest days in nearly 20 years in Lebanon. Israel unleashing the most intense and widespread airstrikes on the country.
It began with warnings sent via text message to the Lebanese people.
There were threats made by phone.
Then came the bombs. Lebanese officials say 490 people died on the first day of the intensified Israeli airstrikes. Tens of thousands fled their homes. Once again, destruction, devastation, and displacement.
There were bombs overhead. No one stayed. We all fled. We took our stuff and left.
I'm scared. Scared for my wife and 5 children. The situation is really difficult and scary. I don't know what's happening to us.
The warnings from the Israeli army became more widespread.
Now, starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Please, get out of harm's way now.
In a matter of days, hundreds of thousands had fled their homes in southern and even eastern Lebanon.
This is one of the main schools in Beirut turned into a shelter for the displaced from southern Lebanon. We understand that there are over 1,000 people in this building alone. In schools nearby also, there is a similar number in every single one. An official here told me that they are opening on average 1 extra school every couple of hours to deal with the very large number of displaced.
It's not just schools that were overwhelmed. Hospitals too have been struggling to deal with the wounded. Women and children among the casualties.
We heard a very loud noise. 2 strikes and we all flew. Each flew in a different direction. Both of my cousins were killed, and my father was killed.
Lebanon health system is under huge strain. ICUs filled with children with life-changing injuries. At the American University Hospital in Beirut, I met Dr. Ghassan Boussetta. He spent time working in Gaza.
They have the same pattern of injuries, blast injuries to the face, amputations to the limbs, injuries as a result of shrapnel. And so it's the same mechanism and the same place in these kids are being injured. Children with war wounds need between 5 and 12 surgeries by the time they reach adult age. This is a growing body, and so you need to come back again and again to do the reconstructive surgery.
This video published by the IDF boasts of killing Hezbollah leaders one after the other. Amidst all the ongoing airstrikes, Israel was systematically targeting and killing senior Hezbollah leaders, culminating in
we're in the office. We heard multiple explosions, one after the other. They were so loud, many of them. We don't know what was happening or where. It's in the middle of Beirut. And this is what we can see from distance.
This huge attack had a colossal impact. The target was Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah and one of the most prominent figures in Lebanon, backed by Iran. The killing of Nasrallah was an earthquake for the party, the country, and region. For this woman, the news was shocking.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered Nasrallah's killing while at the UN. The IDF released this picture of what they say is that moment. His killing was a huge win for Israel. While at the UN, the Israeli leader made a vow to Hezbollah's backers.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
There was no mention of diplomacy.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei promised that the killing of Hassan Nasrallah would not go unavenged. But before any Iranian retaliation, Netanyahu attacked Iranian-backed groups in Yemen and Syria. And it didn't stop there.
Israel's military says its troops have crossed the border into southern Lebanon.
Israel launched the ground invasion into southern Lebanon, the first in 18 years, in what it called limited, localized, and targeted raids against Hezbollah to return displaced Israelis to their homes in the north. Despite Israel's massive blows to Hezbollah, this remains a very challenging operation. Israel doesn't only have Hezbollah to contend with.
Tonight at 6, as we come on air, missiles from Iran have been fired towards Israel.
On the 1st of October, the region held its breath.
Tonight's escalation comes in response to Israel's overnight invasion of southern Lebanon.
Almost 200 ballistic missiles were launched by Iran. The Israeli Defense Forces said most were intercepted by Israel's extensive defensive capabilities. But the IDF said some struck central and southern Israel, with one fatality.
There was a lot of booms. One of them, it was terrible. And when we came out, I saw all the disaster, what's happening. We're happy we're still alive.
The attack was widely condemned by the West, who called for restraint and de-escalation. But both Israel and Iran show no sign of backing down. The Middle East is still reeling from the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October last year. The horror of the last 12 months has been compounded in recent days. By heightened tensions and escalations, which have spread across the region with devastating consequences.
The region has never felt more dangerous or uncertain. Peace and resolution seem to have been abandoned. All sides are promising more attacks, further escalation. Here in Lebanon, the horrors of this conflict are reminiscent of the countless bloody and violent chapters in the country's history. Memories of previous wars with Israel are seared in people's minds and are now mixed with fresh feelings of fear, despair, and anxiety. People here have always felt they are living on the brink. Today, More than ever, uncertainty looms large as they wait for what's next. Something no one seems able to predict.